According to the elder Lich turned clerk, it would take half an hour to process their request. Ludmilla was directed to one of the alcoves to wait to be called upon. It had enough room to seat 4 people on its cushioned benches, with a magical glass lantern that cast its light over the polished wooden table. With a sound resembling a light grunt, Ludmilla set all of her things down, pushing it towards the wall. She waited for Lady Shalltear to be seated before taking her place across the table from her. "Do you think things will go well, my lady?" A shadow of doubt still played across Ludmilla's mind after she had submitted her requests. It seemed a bit too easy. "The clerk submitted your documents to be processed," Lady Shalltear shrugged. "There are not many layers of bureaucracy to get through. There should be someone that double-checks your documents, then another who organizes the orders. Like I said earlier, these elder liches are newly trained, but they are eager to prove themselves useful in their service to His Majesty. It would consider any errors on its first official job absolutely unacceptable." "So you do know how things work," Ludmilla said. "I know bits and pieces here and there," Lady Shalltear admitted. "I've been placed on standby for the last little while, so between ensuring my territory is secure and seeing to the realm's logistical needs, I've had a lot of free time on my hands. I wander the city and the realm, watch what goes on, and sometimes I do some things for myself, but I would much rather be serving His Majesty directly in some way." Lady Shalltear seemed a bit sullen as she spoke, and her downcast manner made Ludmilla frown. Once again, her liege acted in a way which seemed very out of place with the quality of the woman who had graciously taken Ludmilla under her wing. "Well, I for one am appreciative of your time on my behalf, my lady," Ludmilla said in an attempt to pick up her spirits, but she didn't think the gratitude of a relative nobody counted for much. "Humph, spare me the flattery," Lady Shalltear rested her cheek in hand. "The royal court has been working hard to carry out His Majesty's will. In His infinite wisdom, He has given us the time to fulfill His wishes, but that time will be over sooner or later. We must present to Him a thriving realm, and we dare not disappoint Him. You are simply a means to that end." "Then what is His Majesty's will?" Ludmilla asked. "You were there yesterday, were you not?" her liege answered. "What I declare to the people in the city are His wishes for the Sorceress Kingdom." "But surely that can't be all?" There was a long pause between them. Lady Shalltear traced a circle over the surface of the table as she thought on what to say. "Well, His Majesty is truly unfathomable," she replied, "so it is only what we have discerned from both His stated intentions and His actions. He desires a realm where all peoples can thrive and prosper. A nation that can shine as a testament to His mercy, wisdom and glory to the rest of the world. Lord Irons has the power to turn these territories into a blasted and barren wasteland, yet he chose to grant a swift and decisive end to those who would oppose him and presented a hopeful future to his new subjects. As his loyal vassals, we cannot understand, in our eyes, the humans of this realm are repaying grace with spite." Ludmilla felt a pang as Lady Shalltear lamented the current state of affairs. To have one's goodwill and effort go unappreciated and perhaps even scorned was not something anyone could feel pleased over. "I assure you that is not the case, my lady," she said reassuringly. "You might not trust the people of the city when they say so directly, but you should not let this sentiment fester in the royal court without confirming whether it is true or not. Admittedly, I have only been here a short while, and I do not know everything that goes on in the city, but not once have I heard anyone, not the nobles, nor the common folk, speak in ways that I would consider spurning His Majesty's goodwill." Lady Shalltear watched her carefully as she spoke, yet somewhere along the way, her expression started to sour. "Is something the matter, my lady?" Ludmilla spoke carefully as a scowl began to form on the vampire's face. "Then why?" The question was delivered in a low voice, a growl from a beast about to pounce on its prey. "It's because," she stammered as she watched Lady Shalltear's appearance shift, the ethereal visage of delicate beauty melting away, leaving only the menacing image of her true form. "Why?" The vampire's voice had turned into a rasping, malevolent hiss, filling the alcove. Ludmilla was about to glance beyond the secluded space to see if anyone was watching, but the crimson glare flared and her will was forcefully wrested away from her before she even knew what was happening. Dozens of rows of needle-like teeth came close, and the tinge of blood filled the air. "Tell me." Lady Shalltear's voice came out as a sibilant whisper that slithered into Ludmilla's mind. "Tell me the truth. Tell me why these humans continued to defy the will of Lord Dines. They are not defying His Majesty's will. Ludmilla felt her own voice come out in response, flat and emotionless. They are only scared. It is only fear. This is a lie. A lie. Fear? What is there to fear? Are his precious words not enough for you? Do you believe it to be deception? Tell me, is it hate? Do you hate him? He, who has granted his infinite mercy to you, to us. As the questions broke over Ludmilla one after another, Lady Shalltear's voice rose as her words turned into accusations. A tear rolled down the pallid flesh of her cheek at the last as she howled at her. I would strike you all down for your insolence, if not for his order to stay my hand. Turning this entire world into a sea of boiling blood would not nearly be enough to pay for your scorn. It is not a lie, Ludmilla said. It is not distrust, it is not hate. It is fear, and we are only human. For long moments, Ludmilla was pinned in place by the vampire's gaze. She watched as the image of Lady Shalltear's beautiful form eventually returned, superimposed over her true appearance. As she pulled back from leaning over the table and settled into the cushions of her seat, Ludmilla felt herself being released from her liege's mental hold. Across from her, Lady Shalltear was drying her tears with a handkerchief that she had pulled from a pocket inside her bolero. Several minutes passed in silence, before Lady Shalltear spoke tentatively. I was just thinking about my lord's wishes, she said, twiddling the silken handkerchief in her fingers. About how nothing ever seems to go in the right direction, and I lost myself. You will forgive me. You are forgiven, Ludmilla replied in a flat, emotionless tone. The fingers stopped and she looked up at Ludmilla, squeezing her eyes shut tightly and opening them again as her eyelids fluttered and her slitted pupils dilated. Realization that Ludmilla had imitated a charmed voice dawned over her face. That's not funny. Lady Shalltear tried suppressing a laugh, but failed, the effort resulting in something halfway between a laugh and sob. She sniffed, then blew her nose loudly into her handkerchief. Ludmilla waited quietly, attempting to reassert her usual mental state before speaking. When we spoke yesterday, she said, you expressed the state of the citizens before I could even share my thoughts on it. You always speak of your service to His Majesty fondly, and I don't think anyone could question your devotion when they hear you. If I found something that inspired such conviction in me, I think I might become furious as well if something like this happened. I swear, if you keep up with that unwavering cool-headedness of yours, Lady Shalltear said, you'll turn into a golem one day. Is that even possible? No. Not like that, anyways. Ludmilla wondered if Lady Shalltear was trying to get back at her for her prank. The thought brought her back to what had occurred between them. That ability that you used just now, she asked, is that what it feels like every time I use my own on Lutzi? What, are you trying to make me feel guilty? Lady Shalltear made a face. No, that was an ability that vampires possess. Our power to charm others has to do with the supernatural nature of our race. Your abilities have to do with your own race. Humans have a social caste that specializes in administration and leadership, so your nobles have abilities related to their role in human society. Demiurge, one of the most intelligent of His Majesty's servants, speculates that every race with a ruling caste will have their own classes along the same vein as your human aristocracy. He also speculates that races that have become overly reliant on the abilities of their ruling class can be easily disrupted by eliminating them at opportune moments, or better yet, by taking control of them in some form and having them lead in a manner that suits our objectives. Ludmilla felt that talking about usurping those in leadership while sitting in a government office seemed terribly wrong, so she steered the conversation in a different direction while nervously looking towards the reception counter. Still, telling people to do something and having them act as a result of an ability, Ludmilla mused. Even Countess Jesn only seemed to be able to encourage the nobles around her to collect themselves, if that was even her ability at work. I still can't tell whether one has been persuaded to act through normal means or through the use of an ability. Yes, that's something interesting I noticed as well, Lady Shalltear said. What you did was not just subtly influencing others, but reinforcing them and ordering them into action. This is something that those with commander classes do, but as of yet, we haven't encountered any other nobles that have demonstrated active command abilities. We know that commanders exist amongst humans at large. Carney Village reportedly has a farmer girl with the ability to do so, but this arose out of a decidedly strange set of circumstances. Since humans appear to have many classes that are unfamiliar to us, I think you may have something along those lines. Ludmilla already knew how she was going to reply. It had been under her consideration for a while now. There is something you said earlier, to think about what people notice, that I never considered truly special. More than a few have mentioned nobles from the frontier as being, beyond the rest of their peers, that we were made differently, somehow. My maid said something along these lines shortly after we were first introduced and they entered my household. Oh? Lady Shalltear straightened in her seat. This is a promising lead. What did they say, exactly? Amelia said that I could brave the city streets when none of the other nobles were capable of doing so. Ludmilla made an account of her memories, even after said nobles had worked up the courage to try. That I appeared like a gallant warrior, ready to fight at any time. Countess Jesn said she had expectations of me, though she never elaborated on what she meant. Bohadan, the village priest in Warden's Vale, remarked that I shared a similar trait with my ancestors, the willingness to face danger with a resolute will, and he, too, told me that the people of the frontier were different than those of the interior. My parents said many things as well, but all noble parents seem to teach their children that they are superior in some way. I never really considered it seriously until now. So is it true? Lady Shalltear asked, everything that they said about you? Ludmilla shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Frontiersmen were not ones to brazenly advertise themselves, and she was no exception. I think so, yes, she replied. There's so much more now that you've brought it to my attention. My brothers were much better fighters than the other noble scions when they practiced together, and they almost always stood at the center of a crowd. I can feel that I am stronger than other people as well. I can run a bit faster, last a bit longer, carry more and fight better. My parents could outfight any of the rangers and fighters in the village, and during the Battle of Katza Plains, my lord father was able to keep his men from breaking, right until the end. Ludmilla swallowed after the last of those words left her mouth. She wasn't sure when she had decided her family was lost, and now she felt absolutely terrible hearing herself say as much. This is a lot to think about. Lady Shalltear said solemnly, if all these claims can be proven to be true, then it will be a matter of grave importance. Surely you cannot mean that, my lady, Ludmilla said incredulously. With so many powerful servants at His Majesty's disposal, it hardly seems to matter. You're correct that at your level it makes a negligible impact in combat as an individual, Lady Shalltear agreed, but a commander placed over a company of powerful soldiers should still make them that much stronger. I would also be negligent in my duties to think that the world would conveniently present weak opponents forever. I need to speak to Demiurge about this. No, Moman would be the closest to an expert that we have. He was even right about you yesterday during the council meeting. Just how much of this has he planned out, I wonder? You will be taking your leave then, my lady? Ludmilla asked. No. You humans have your inconvenient need for sleep, and we've still other things to do before your day is over. Lady Shalltear looked to the reception area, from where a figure approached. I believe your paperwork has gone through. An elder Lich had appeared from the office behind the counter, circled around the reception desk, and was now purposely walking their way. Its tattered robes of black silk shimmered as it walked by the windows, and it held a long, gnarled staff in its right hand. The end of the staff touched the ground in time with its steps, but Ludmilla could hear neither the tapping noise that should have accompanied the action, nor the sound of the elder Lich's footfalls. It came to stand a few meters away, bowing to Lady Shalltear, then looked to Ludmilla. It had the same stained strips of cloth lined with strange lettering like the other elder Liches at the counter. In addition, it held a large, leather-bound tome pressed to its chest. Is it saying something, my lady? Ludmilla frowned. I was watching it approach, but I did not hear anything at all. Oh, that's right. Lady Shalltear motioned for the elder Lich to step forward. After a single stride, its footsteps could be heard, as could the sound of its staff tapping on the floor. The humans that constructed this city are quite adept at building spaces for large numbers of citizens in close proximity, her liege said. These alcoves were designed to provide privacy without the need to construct additional rooms. We've revisited many of these concepts when we occupied the city and created additional security measures. We decided for a silence spell to be maintained for these alcoves so that the office's clients can discuss their personal business privately within. The other nobles should be pleased with this consideration once they become accustomed to life in the city, my lady. She looked up to the elder Lich that was now standing beside the table. So, were there any problems with my submitted requests? No outstanding issues were identified, it replied, and Ludmilla let out a relieved sigh. The elder Lich had a markedly different voice than the one they had spoken to at the counter. It still had something of an abrasive and dry rasp, but the tone was distinctly female. Your request is being seen to, it informed her, and will be arriving shortly outside. This one has been ordered by the Guardian Overseer to accompany Baroness Zaradnik to her territory as an attaché. An attaché? Lady Shalltear peered suspiciously at the elder Lich. Why would Albedo suddenly want to stick her big nose into something she didn't want anything to do with just yesterday? Lady Albedo has deemed it to be the most efficient manner by which to fine-tune various mechanisms of administration and labor in their associated fields. The elder Lich replied dispassionately, this has been mandated as standard practice when information is insufficient to publish suitable manuals. Ugh, did she train you to speak like that too? Lady Shalltear complained in a long-suffering tone. The last thing I want to hear is hundreds of elder Liches parroting that insufferable Baroness the Guardian Overseer. The elder Lich gave no response, which in turn appeared to worsen Lady Shalltear's disposition. Where will the units from the request be delivered? Ludmilla hurriedly filled in the silence. Will I be able to review them before they are deployed? They are currently en route to the main avenue, the elder Lich answered. You may review them in front of the civil office. As if on cue, Amelia appeared in Ludmilla's line of sight, standing over 5 meters behind the elder Lich. Her lips were moving as she made fretful motions with her hands, but the enchantment preventing sound from crossing the threshold of the alcove stopped the maid's words from reaching her. Ludmilla rose from her seat, stepping past the elder Lich to leave the alcove. Hounded by undead, my lady. Thousands of them. Amelia's panicked words met her as she stepped out of the alcove. Her auburn hair was jostled as she bounced anxiously on the balls of her feet. What do we do? She said worriedly. Are we under attack? Ludmilla placed her hand on the maid's shoulder to still her as she turned her head to look towards the window. The angle was poor, so she ended up walking out of the office entrance to take a look from the top of the stairs. Arrayed below were her requested workforce, but rather than a loose collection of various laborers, they were neatly organized like a company of professional soldiers. On the road nearest to the sidewalk were 40 bone vultures, arranged in a rectangle 10 wide and 4 deep. Directly adjacent to their formation was another consisting of 20 undead beasts in the form of boars. They were set 5 wide and 4 deep. Behind their lines were 100 skeletons armed with round shields and short spears that glistened when breaks in the mostly overcast skies allowed the sun to shine through. Like the undead beasts, they were arranged in groups of 20. At the corner of each of the skeleton formations, a Death Knight stood where a sergeant would normally be. The Death Knights still held their massive tower shields, but their blades were sheathed. Their weapon hands instead gripped tall banners upon which the vermilion standard of the Sorceress Kingdom flew proudly in the spring breeze. Ludmilla supposed that if it were a company, then all they lacked was a captain. She stepped down to take a closer look, and as she arrived at the bottom of the stairs, the avenue was filled with a singular noise as the entire group stood to attention. Lady Shalltear appeared at Ludmilla's arm with her dark parasol open over her shoulder, speaking over the stiff breeze that scattered the spring blossoms into the air around them. Are they to your liking? She asked her. The numbers check out, my lady, Ludmilla replied. However, any spectators would think that I am about to go forth to conquer my enemies rather than conquering unruly fields. You have enemies? Lady Shalltear raised an eyebrow. That's hard to imagine considering how unflappable you seem to be. Well, there are types that we are not particularly fond of, but not in the sense that most would consider enemies to be. Ludmilla thought to the wariness that her father held for Count Fassett. Being frontier nobles, House Zaradnik stood apart from the squabbling that occurs in the interior. Our enemies have always ever been those that would infringe upon and act unlawfully within the realm of our liege. If it had been any other of your kind standing here saying that, Lady Shalltear said, those words would have felt like lip service, I think. Did I unconsciously use my ability on you, my lady? Ludmilla made to apologize. I doubt it. Her liege smiled slightly for some reason. Undead are immune to mind-affecting spells and abilities. Lady Shalltear's vampire brides, Amelia and the elder Lich joined them shortly after, each of the three attendants carrying a portion of the books and files that remained after Ludmilla finished submitting her forms. Arranged before her was the manifestation of those forms, and Ludmilla was now mentally going through the checklist of things that she wanted to have taken care of before the day was over. The applications that she had filled were meant to provide only raw labor, so the fact that many of the undead standing in front of her were armed was unexpected. Unfortunately, being armed did not really help with the task she had requisitioned them for. It was up to the applicant leasing the undead labor to provide the appropriate equipment, though there were a few recommendations that came with them in the provided almanacs. In hindsight, procuring the undead labor was probably the easier part of what she had to do. It was the exact opposite of what she had originally expected to go through to find new tenants. Though she would still need to find tenants to direct the undead labor, the number required was drastically reduced compared to what would have been required before. Ludmilla thought that she could at least get things started while she waited for them, and see how things worked for herself. She turned to address Amelia. "Lutzi, take these things back to the guest house," she instructed her maid. "Actually, hand me the blue folder first, I'll be needing that." "Yes, my lady," Amelia said as she handed over what had been requested. "I hope you don't mind my borrowing your servants, Lady Shalltear," Ludmilla said. "It's not a problem," Lady Shalltear replied. "We're trying to produce results as quickly as possible here." Ludmilla turned to the Death Knights that had accompanied them. "Escort Lutzi back to the guest house," she told the one standing on her left. "Return with her when she has completed her task." Amelia, who had already started to walk back to the house, overheard that a Death Knight would be coming with her. She darted along the road with the vampire brides, walking faster and faster over the cobblestones, but the Death Knight slowly closed in on them despite her efforts. "I hope no one gets the wrong idea seeing that," Ludmilla remarked as she watched the Death Knight chase the women up the street. "I thought the goal was to assuage the fears of the citizens, not feed them." Ludmilla frowned and looked down towards Lady Shalltear, but the vampire only looked on innocently. Ludmilla turned to the elder Lich. "Well, I suppose we should get on with the next order of business," she said. "Will these laborers stay here, or is there somewhere that they can assemble and wait for their equipment?" They were instructed to present themselves for inspection in front of the civil office, the elder Lich answered. "They are under the leaseholder's authority upon delivery." Ludmilla looked around absently as she thought of a place to have them wait. Leaving them in the main avenue of the central district was probably something that would disrupt traffic if the city was even slightly busy. "Are they permitted transit through the city on their own?" Ludmilla asked. "They will not be intercepted if they traverse the city in a non-disruptive manner," the elder Lich answered. "All right then." She turned to her new laborers. "Head to the military district, using the main roads. Assemble at the first available mustering field to the west of the south gate and await me there." The bone vultures all took wing at once, while the other groups of undead marched away in formation. Ludmilla watched with some satisfaction as the formation filed off under her orders. "That was interesting," Lady Shalltear noted from beside her. "You didn't even raise your voice to issue your instructions, but they all heard you over the wind. Considering that you just realized you had these powers, when did you learn how to do that?" "Just then, my lady." Ludmilla's voice was a bit bemused as she answered, "I was actually going to raise my voice like those famous captains and generals in the tales that minstrels tell, but when I started speaking, I noticed that even the ones all the way in the back that shouldn't have heard me had already reacted. So I just spoke normally. In regular circumstances, they should not have heard me, but this ability carried my voice to everyone." "Did you know if they would arrive at their destination?" Lady Shalltear said. No." Ludmilla looked towards the receding laborers in alarm. "Wait, they won't?" "They will, in this case," Lady Shalltear replied. "As long as they receive their orders, they will perform according to your intent, as long as it is something that they themselves are able to manage without more precise direction. In the worst case, the Death Knights with them will rally any lost skeletons. You will probably need to show these laborers how to do some uncommon things at some point, since your territory seems to produce goods that are not commonly cultivated in Riestais." Ludmilla breathed a sigh of relief. The last thing she needed was to have inadvertently commanded her newly acquired workforce to rampage through the city on the way to their destination. "Well then," she said, "I need to find where my goods have disappeared to now. What happened to them? Before I left Warden's Vale, Moman threw everything into a hole much like the one that you used yesterday evening. Ah, yes, that was me. Aura and Mare had quite the time catching all those things that suddenly came flying through. Lady Shalltear smiled at the recollection. Your goods are in the government warehouses, let's be on our way. Lady Shalltear turned in the direction of the royal villa and walked off. Ludmilla followed, and the elder Lich followed after Ludmilla. The day had brightened considerably since the morning, with the overcast skies breaking up to reveal the azure heights beyond. A brisk wind was sending the clouds southwards rapidly. She wondered if the rain of the previous night would arrive as snow in Warden's Vale. They continued around the royal villa and past the gazebo that was used as the location to teleport in and out of. The entrance to the city stores was a fortified and guarded gate tucked away on one side of the central district, where a ramp led down to the vast warehouses had been carved deep into the hill below. The city had furnished it with magical devices that enchanted the entire space with a preservation effect, which would keep the tremendous volume of siege provisions stored within from spoiling. They passed between the two Death Knights standing guard at the top of the large ramp that led down into the cavernous areas below, steps echoing lightly off of the tunnel-like passage. After 2 turns, most of the light had been swallowed in darkness, and Ludmilla found herself looking at row upon row of shelves that reached all the way to the ceiling, which was perhaps 5 meters above her head. They were supposed to be filled with the supplies that had been meant for the armies of Reastais, but after scanning their contents, she saw that the nearest portion of the warehouse was already being emptied and there were many bare spaces. After passing several aisles, Lady Shalltear stopped and turned to face an aisle to her right. The things on the bottom shelf there should be yours. She pointed down the way a bit. Make sure nothing has wandered off. Ludmilla stepped towards where Lady Shalltear was pointing and quickly located the shelf that appeared to have the goods from the warehouse in Warden's Vale. They had taken up a significant portion of the storage space in her home village, but here they only occupied perhaps 1/3 of the bottom shelf of a small fraction of the city warehouse. She felt rather tiny as she checked what she saw against one of the documents in the blue file folder to ensure that everything was in order. It looks like everything is here, my lady, Ludmilla called out. Are there problems with theft down here? The security in the city seems overwhelming. I was just making sure, Lady Shalltear said. There are no issues with thieves, but samples are sometimes taken for analysis if we find something that might be interesting or different. What do you plan on doing with all this? I need to have it loaded onto a wagon, and then search for someone that is available and willing to purchase these goods. Well, none of the ones in the warehouse are being used, so it shouldn't be an issue. You, Lady Shalltear addressed the elder Lich, submit a request for a wagon from here on behalf of Lady Zaradnik. We'll pick you up at the civil office on the way out. The elder Lich bowed silently, and walked away towards the entrance. I was not aware that they could do that, my lady, Ludmilla said as the tapping of its staff receded into the distance. Well, it's supposed to be your administrative attaché, is it not? I'm pretty sure you humans do the same thing, sending others that function under your authority. That is correct, my lady, Ludmilla admitted. I guess my family has just always done most things directly. The tread of a Death Knight and the light of a lantern coming from the entrance drew their attention. The 4 that had left to drop off Ludmilla's files had returned. Did you run into any trouble? Ludmilla looked between the members of the group as they arrived. Actually, how did you even find us? I do not recall mentioning where we would be headed. No, my lady, Amelia said. Lady Shalltear's attendants appeared to know where you went after we parted. Mrs. Rowe asked if you would be having lunch at the house. The maid's question reminded Ludmilla of the wholly inadequate breakfast from the morning. What is she preparing? She asked. She was not aware of any itinerary, my lady, only that you would be out for most of the day, Amelia replied, so it's a meal that can be packed if necessary. That will be fine, Ludmilla nodded. Head back to the house and let her know. While you are there, find my scarf and shawl and bring it with lunch. This wind keeps getting stronger. Wait for us in front of the civil office. You should see the elder Lich waiting for us there as well. Amelia's head nodded at each instruction. When it seemed that there would be nothing more forthcoming, she curtsied before them and turned to leave. Continue escorting Lutzi. Ludmilla told the Death Knight to maintain its orders, and Amelia looked at her like she was about to cry. "Do not run away from your escort this time," Ludmilla instructed her maid. "It looked like you were about to be murdered on the street just now." Amelia's mouth worked silently as she looked back and forth between her mistress and the Death Knight, her expression asking how she ended up being in the wrong somehow. When it was clear that she would receive no consolation, she sighed and slowly walked off. Despite claiming to be used to doing things directly, Lady Shalltear noted, "You certainly don't seem to mind running your new staff back and forth." "Lutzi is aspiring to be my lady's maid," Ludmilla explained, "but my household currently does not have a page, and the footman would scare everyone else witless. She should understand this as well as I. Besides, her visibility in the streets in the company of the Death Knight contributes to the idea of safety that we are trying to promote amongst the citizens here, yes?" "I see. Well," Lady Shalltear looked over to direct her vampire brides, "let's get these things off the shelf and ready to load on the wagon." From the depths of the warehouse, the sound of hooves on stone echoed through the aisles. As her inventory was arranged near the path that ran through the warehouse by Lady Shalltear's attendants, a wagon drawn by a skeletal horse turned the far corner. Lurid light shone from within its bony frame, which was embraced with sickly yellow-green fog that shimmered and rippled like living flesh as it trotted forward. The wagon appeared to have no driver, yet it rolled smoothly to a stop in front of them. The vampire brides immediately began to place the various articles onto the bed of the wagon in an orderly fashion. Taking in the details of the skeletal horse, Ludmilla turned her head towards Lady Shalltear. "Is this an undead beast as well?" she asked. "It seems quite different from the ones that you showed me earlier." "This is a soul eater," Lady Shalltear replied. "They are level 40, so substantially more powerful than a simple undead beast." "This horse is more powerful than a Death Knight?" "They have very different sets of traits and abilities which makes them useful for different things, but yes, in rough terms, they are." Ludmilla envisioned a teamster driving a cart pulled by beings that could destroy a city. What would happen if there was an accident? What happens if the cart breaks, or if there is some sort of mishap? That hasn't happened yet," Lady Shalltear tilted her head in thought, "but it's strong enough to forcefully drag a broken cart loaded with goods around. I'm not sure if everything will stay on the wagon in that situation though. The wagon itself might break apart." Lady Shalltear hopped onto the driver's bench as the vampire brides loaded the last of the goods. The two attendants took their seats at the back of the wagon bed, their pale legs dangling off the edge. Ludmilla pulled herself onto the driver's seat beside Lady Shalltear. The Soul Eater turned its head to look at her with a glowing eye socket. "Let us pick up the others at the civil office first," Ludmilla said. The Soul Eater turned its head back and began plodding forward. Ludmilla looked over her goods worriedly as the wagon rolled up the ramp, but the shallow incline leading out of the warehouse was not steep enough to cause anything to slide out of the back of a loaded wagon bed. She watched the skeletal horse as it made its way up. Pulling a freight wagon was something that normally required large teams of horses, yet this single undead being did so effortlessly. They found that the clouds had completely broken since they entered the underground warehouse, and the warmth of the sun was rapidly turning the day pleasant. Free of the need to carefully maneuver through the tight turns leading out of the warehouse, the Soul Eater picked its pace up to a brisk trot, and the noise of its hooves on the cobblestones made it seem like they were being pulled along by a regular horse, at least until one looked at the horse itself. It took all of 2 minutes to reach their destination as they circled around the district, finally slowing to pull up in front of the civil office. The trio waiting by the stairs turned their heads at the sound of the wagon's approach. Amelia visibly jumped to the sight of the Soul Eater, and she seemed on the verge of panic until her eyes found Ludmilla sitting in the front seat with Lady Shalltear. She spotted the other attendants sitting in the back of the wagon and circled around, handing her lunch basket to one of the vampire brides so she could pull herself up to join them. Ludmilla took a deep breath and released it in anticipation of what was to come. So far her day had been relatively straightforward with the help of Lady Shalltear and the smooth workings of the new administration. It had all been completed within a single morning, so quickly that the next group of tasks were already upon her before she could fully think through what needed to be done. "Time for the annoying part," she muttered to herself. "You've been progressing steadily thus far," Lady Shalltear picked up on Ludmilla's soft mutter. "Why would the next part present any difficulties?" The next part involves finding the right people out of all of the citizens that are hiding in their homes. Ludmilla returned to her usual, clear voice, and I am not quite sure how to accomplish this, my lady. Frontier nobles are nobles, but we only share some very basic similarities with the nobles of the interior. You mentioned a little while ago about how you believe you are only good for fighting, but I am in something of the same situation as well. I have been trained in all of the things required to carry out House Zirodnik's duties in defending the border. This would include logistics, organizing and leading armed patrols, as well as managing our small fief, but my skills in administration and commerce are nowhere near as substantial as someone like Baroness Collin. Our house does not have much in the way of connections, either. Well, what did you do last year, then? Lady Shalltear asked. Our goods were sold to a wholesaler, Ludmilla answered. Merchants who have both the capital and storage to take in large quantities of goods and bide their time to turn a profit meeting the demands of the markets. That way, we would be able to return to our duties on the border within a couple of weeks, after dealing with some other noble functions. However, if the city is like this, not only will it be difficult to find such a merchant, but the markets will have slowed to nothing as well and the prices for everything may not be as projected. So you have to ride around the entire city until you find someone? Lady Shalltear frowned. Perhaps, perhaps not. Ludmilla turned to the elder Lich. Are there any markets that are still active in the city? As of this morning, no open market areas have been reported in the city, the elder Lich replied. Emergency supplies are currently being distributed by Lady Shalltear Bloodfallen and her staff in the interim. What about guilds? The Adventurer Guild and Mage Guild are maintaining limited operations. How about the Merchant Guild? There has been no reported activity from the Merchant Guild or any of its associated trade guilds in the past week. Ludmilla bit her lip lightly as she thought about what she could do. How does the city procure goods when there is no commerce? She asked. The elder Lich remained silent. Its fingers lightly tapped the leather-bound book that it held to its chest while it pondered her question. Lady Shalltear spoke, filling in for the perplexed Attache. The short answer is that we're not, currently, she said. The government warehouse is slowly being depleted over time. You estimated that they would last 1 year, while the Guardian Overseer's estimates are closer to 2 if rationing measures are enforced immediately. She expressed great confidence that Rantel would not need to resort to such a policy initially, but with the lack of progress in the past week I believe that she is beginning to consider it as an option. Ludmilla grimaced. The siege-like nature of their situation felt ever more real with the idea that the people might begin to see their necessities limited. Will the city purchase goods while the markets are closed, my lady? The Sorceress Kingdom guarantees a minimum rate for basic materials, Lady Shalltear said. But, they would most likely not be favorable compared to regular market prices. The merchant I spoke of yesterday shouted ridiculous. And stormed off, leaving Sabos standing alone in the street with only his good intentions to keep him company. How was he able to trade in the city then? Ludmilla asked. I don't think he did. The following council meeting, it was reported that he spent the day running all around the city's markets and guilds with no apparent success. He left the city the next morning. Ludmilla exhaled sharply. She had hoped that information from the lively merchant whom Lady Shalltear had mentioned would lead to a solution to her conundrum as well. With one avenue closed, she decided to pursue another, turning to the elder Lich once more. Do you know where the nobles currently residing in the city are housed? The elder Lich nodded silently. We will stop by the nobles' clubhouse first, then, Ludmilla decided. After that, we can find the remaining nobles that were not present there. The ones in the city should be in their respective manors here since they are supposedly too frightened to move around much more than that. As the wagon rolled forward, the 2 Death Knights fell in line to either side of the wagon. The elder Lich kept pace on the road at Ludmilla's side of the front seat. Lady Shalltear looked up at her from the side. You have an idea? Perhaps, my lady, Ludmilla said. My family was not as well connected as the other nobles but, since everyone else here is staying put and not doing anything, I was thinking that we might be able to make use of their connections in exchange for a finder's fee or perhaps a future favor. That is our best chance now, I think. It was not long until the wagon pulled up in front of the clubhouse. The ornate building did not show any signs of being occupied from the outside, though this was also the case for the previous evening. Lutzi, come with me, She called to her maid sitting behind. "Excuse us while we check if anyone is here first, my lady." Ludmilla stepped down from the wagon as Lady Shalltear lazily waved her away. Amelia joined her, stepping ahead to open the doors. They were greeted by an empty reception desk, and the lounge area was vacant as well. There were no odors of food or beverage in the air, and the furniture lay pristine and undisturbed. Amelia went around the halls, returning after a few minutes and shaking her head as she looked towards her. "All right," Ludmilla said, "I guess we will have to visit each of them in turn, then." After they returned to the wagon, she spoke with her attaché. "I need to know where all the nobles in the city are staying, beginning with Baroness Clara Odelia Dale Collin." "Baroness Collin resides at guest house number 18, the attaché replied almost immediately. "Take us there," she instructed the Shalltear. "Find a corner out of sight of the main entrance to stop, however. If the residents are still fearful, then we should keep their fears out of sight for the time being." The wagon rolled forward again with its small entourage. Not half a minute had passed when the Shalltear stopped in the service lane that ran along the wall, behind the outer ring of manors which circled the district. Ludmilla stepped off of the wagon again, remaining still while Amelia checked over her appearance. Lady Shalltear came around with her attendants, watching the maid as she worked to fix any flaws in Ludmilla's outfit. "Have you considered getting enchanted equipment?" Lady Shalltear idly spoke as she observed their activity. Ludmilla turned her head at the question, trying to remain stationary for her maid. "You mean arms and armor, my lady?" Magical equipment was far beyond the means of her family, whose meager fief existed only a little beyond subsistence. The outfit that she currently wore was all that consisted of her formal wardrobe, and even that had been the product of the better part of a year's worth of hard work. It had required her to sacrifice other things in order to be able to afford it. "Just daily clothing, in this case," Lady Shalltear said. "Enchanted items will adjust to fit themselves perfectly to their wearer. They'll also restore themselves to form unless they completely run out of durability, so you don't even have to worry about the sort of thing you're doing right now." Amelia froze upon hearing this. Her hand stopped partway while moving to fix a crease in Ludmilla's skirts. "Is it normal to have magical clothing in your domain?" Ludmilla asked. "Riestais has little in the way of magical items. Most of them belong to adventurers and mages, or are heirlooms of powerful noble houses. What people more commonly see are tools that help with daily life, like magical faucets or the lighting in the city streets." "It is. Even the lowest maids have enchanted uniforms, so there is no great fuss concerning maintenance. Nearly my entire wardrobe is enchanted to various degrees." Lady Shalltear's voice took on a rare proud note. "Perhaps one day, after you're successful in your task, I'll display a few pieces for you." "I have never seen enchanted clothing before, my lady, so that would be wonderful. I believe Lutzi would be very much interested as well." The maid's hands started working again. A minute passed before she stepped away, indicating that they were ready to move. Ludmilla took the blue folder that lay on her wagon seat, and together they made their way around the guest house to the front. The Shalltear and the Death Knights remained in the service lane, under the shadow of the wall. Like all of the other manors in the district aside from her own, there was no one stationed to guard the entrance. The manor itself was styled in a similar appearance to all the other guest houses, though there were a few differences in its structure. Amelia walked ahead to pull the chain for the doorbell and returned to stand behind Ludmilla a few meters away from the entrance. She heard movement coming from inside, but it was a long time before they heard someone walk up to the door. There was the brief sound of a lock tumbling before the entrance opened a sliver, and an almond-shaped eye peeked out. The eye looked from person to person until she recognized Ludmilla standing amongst the group. "Ludmilla?" she said suspiciously. "This is not some sort of trick, is it?" "We just saw each other yesterday, Clara," Ludmilla replied. "Why would this be a trick?" There was a short pause as the fearful noblewoman examined her face, followed by a relieved breath as she visibly relaxed and fully opened the door. She was in a simple dress of pastel yellow, and she seemed well enough beyond her nervous countenance. "Ever since Count Fassett," she explained, "every time one of us goes to have an audience with the royal court, the rest wonder if they will ever return." "Have other nobles disappeared like this?" Ludmilla's eyebrow rose. "At least one other that I know of," Clara nodded. Then a little while ago, Baron Hammer was looking out of his window and started shouting about how some poor women were being run down in the street by the undead. I could not even bear the thought, never mind look out to see. When the doorbell sounded, I thought it was the end for us. Baron Hammer? Ludmilla tried attaching a face to the name, but came up short. However, she spotted the face of the boy she had left in the clubhouse the previous evening poking his head around the corner of the corridor further within the manor. Clara, now it was Ludmilla's turn to be suspicious. Why is Baron Hamel in your manor? Clara noticed Ludmilla looking past her shoulder and quickly turned her head to look behind her as the mop of sandy blonde hair disappeared back around the corner. That's, the Baron has taken up residence in the neighboring manor, and we have neighboring fiefs as well. We already knew each other from before, and he wanted to stay over because he was scared to be alone. I see. Ludmilla's voice was flat. Nothing untoward has happened. Clara's amethyst eyes looked at her innocently. It is just comforting to be with others with everything that has gone on recently. Besides, we followers of the Six have our own ways, yes? Ludmilla supposed that Clara was correct. As followers of the Six, they had their own approach to selecting consorts. Still, harmful rumors might come out of it. What of your servants? We do not have any. All the ones that were offered by the city were not in a state to work at all. Clara laughed nervously. Housework has been quite the adventure. Wait, how do you have servants out and about? They just needed a bit of confidence, I think. Ludmilla replied, you should try and encourage them sometime. Lady Collin gave her a strange look, not understanding the meaning of her words. Also one of the women with the Death Knight was probably my maid Lutzi here, Ludmilla continued. I sent her on a few errands with an escort. Clara's mouth fell open. Why you command these undead now? She asked. The Death Knights are on loan from His Majesty as footmen for my household, Ludmilla answered. They are remarkably competent, actually. The fearful expression appeared on Clara's face again and she looked all around, as if expecting undead to be hiding around every corner. Ludmilla stood to the side, allowing her a clear view of the street in front of her home. She calmed down again after seeing that there were no horrors lurking about. Lady Shalltear lightly cleared her throat, and Ludmilla proceeded to the matter at hand. I have come on official business, however, she said. Do you have some time to spare? Oh, of course. Clara's eyes shifted over to Lady Shalltear, then back to Ludmilla. But who is this beautiful girl? Ludmilla straightened, realizing that she had been rude to not introduce her liege first. Apologies for my rudeness in not introducing her beforehand. Ludmilla turned to present Lady Shalltear. This is Lady Shalltear Bloodfallen, Minister of Transportation. Clara's mouth was agape again. A Royal Councillor? Here? She immediately dropped into a deep curtsy. Welcome to my residence, Lady Minister. Baroness Clara Odelia Dale Collin, at your service. You have never seen Lady Shalltear before? Ludmilla asked curiously. I thought all of the other nobles had an audience with the royal court upon their arrival in the city. She might have been there, I am not sure. Beads of sweat formed on Clara's brow. There were others there, and I was scared witless. They sent me away and I can barely remember anything about the audience. Anyways, I am being rude. Allow me to entertain you in the parlor. We have some refreshments, biscuits that were delivered earlier today. We have water as well, as long as you do not mind the charred flavor. We are in a bit of a hurry, actually, Ludmilla said as she glanced sidelong to Lady Shalltear. I need to borrow your merchant contacts in the city. Merchants? I don't think your domain uses the same merchants as ours does it? Clara was right. The territories on the gentle slopes of the riverlands cultivated vast vineyards and orchards which went into the desserts, jams and liquors produced in the territory. Anything is fine at this point, Ludmilla said. Even if they cannot help directly, they might know someone who can. How about blacksmiths, toolmakers and the like? We have a village blacksmith that does nearly everything, Clara replied. Merchants passing on the highway to and from the theocracy sell us raw materials and everything else, usually. After they received what information Baroness Collin could provide, Ludmilla thanked her and they started walking back to the wagon. Writing with a stick of charcoal seems a bit inconvenient, Lady Shalltear remarked as Ludmilla wiped her hands on her handkerchief. Carrying an ink bottle around would be a mess waiting to happen, my lady, Ludmilla said as she settled back on the driver's bench. "I can lend you a pen, if you'd like." Lady Shalltear held out her hand, and an elegant-looking instrument appeared in her fingers. "You're going to have charcoal stains everywhere by the time we've gotten all the information we need." "This is a fountain pen?" Ludmilla tried writing with it, and her letters came out smoothly. "Thank you, Lady Shalltear, or is it Lady Bloodfallen? My vassals usually address me as Lady Shalltear, so what you've been using is acceptable." The next house they came to was occupied by Count Volkenheim and, to Ludmilla's surprise, the door opened shortly after they came calling. A tall, middle-aged man with a rough appearance appeared in the doorway, holding a long bronze candlestick in one hand. Something about the image he projected tugged at the edge of Ludmilla's recognition. "Oya?" After noticing that it was not some monster that had come to the door, he placed the candlestick aside and his face brightened. "To what does House Volkenheim owe the pleasure of such beautiful young ladies today?" "Count Volkenheim?" Ludmilla asked while still attempting to place his appearance. "Ah, no," the man hastily denied the appellation. "I am Andrei, a retainer of the Count, currently serving as his valet." His movements and mannerisms finally came together in Ludmilla's mind. "A ranger?" "Why yes, young miss," he replied with some surprise. "How did you know?" Ludmilla felt a bit of a twinge. Volkenheim County was not a frontier territory, but they had been forced to take up arms to defend themselves as the frontier territories that were supposed to be holding the wilderness at bay slowly collapsed. Demi-human raids on their territory were not severe, due to their distance to the border ranges, but it was still something of an unasked-for burden. "I am Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik," she introduced herself, then motioned to her right. "This is Lady Shalltear Bloodfallen, Minister of Transportation. We are here to speak with Count Volkenheim." Andrei's face paled as the titles rolled out of Ludmilla's mouth. "Forgive my rudeness, Lady Bloodfallen, Lady Zaradnik," he hurriedly bowed, his voice rising in apology as he bent at nearly a perpendicular angle. "I will call for the Count, please. Come in and take a seat in the patio garden." His speech slowed as he looked to be deciding whether he should be seating the Count's visitors, informing the Count of his guests, or dividing himself in half to accomplish both tasks at once. "We won't be long, we just require some information from Count Volkenheim," Ludmilla spoke to eliminate his indecision. "It will be fine for us to wait here." He gave them one last, conflicted look before leaving the doorway behind and disappearing around a corner. They heard him shouting for the Count, then he seemed to cut himself off, realizing that he was shouting for a noble in the presence of other nobles. "Well, he certainly seems quite different," Lady Shalltear mused. "He carries himself like a frontiersman," Ludmilla said. "To be honest with you, I am more used to that sort of conduct than I am this whole dance of etiquette that the inner nobles conduct." "Perhaps you should act more like yourself then?" her liege suggested. "There's no need to put on airs with me." "I am acting like myself," Ludmilla replied, "at least how I act in an urban, public setting. The villagers I am used to are the ones that act like him, also my brothers, and my father." "Are you saying you're the only person in your entire barony that acts like this?" "Well, yes," Ludmilla paused for a moment. "Though my mother did so as well, everyone says I take after her. Even though we were a remote border territory, she always behaved in a manner that suggested we were more than that, and everyone around her was influenced as a result. Thanks to you, my lady, I understand why she did this now." "So when you're out in your own territory, you speak more like this fellow?" "Not exactly, my lady," Ludmilla replied. "Well, perhaps more informally. My conduct, however, would be unacceptable in the city according to Lutzi here." The maid reacted to being named, but stayed silent. There was a thumping of heavy footsteps as someone came down the stairs, followed by a shadow in the light of the courtyard inside. A young man appeared in the hall, looking very much like he had rushed to dress and groom himself. Somewhat winded, he came forward, but stopped partway down the hall to stare at his visitors. Then, he turned right back around and disappeared behind the corner that he had come from. Ludmilla thought she could hear some fierce whispering, and after several moments, the young man appeared again. Additional effort had been made to fix his appearance, though his outfit still held creases from where it had probably been haphazardly thrown somewhere and left for hours. He came forward stiffly with his greetings. "Torkel Karendale Volkenheim," he made an exaggerated bow as he introduced himself, Count of Volkenheim. Baroness Ludmilla Zarodnik. Ludmilla curtsied, then rose and swept her arm out to present Lady Shalltear. Lady Shalltear Bloodfallen, Minister of Transportation. How may I be of service, my ladies? Count Volkenheim's eyes kept bouncing back and forth between all of the women arrayed before him, before his gaze finally settled on Lady Shalltear. Behind him, Ludmilla thought she saw Andre roll his eyes,